In this video, I'll show you the tools used in a high production club building shop. The chapters are on the timeline and in the description below. I have grown from a hobby builder to a mid-volume custom club builder. My craftsmanship has earned me major brand head-only accounts. I purchase heads from the OEMs and shafts directly from the shaft companies. I then custom build clubs for my clients to precisely match what we tested during a fitting session. During high season, I build a lot of golf club sets. The tools you will see in this video are what I use in my shop. I have not been compensated for this video. Well, that's not exactly true. Having quality tools saves me time when I'm in the shop building. And having tools I can depend on lets me deliver clubs to my customers when they are promised. This episode shows you the essential tools used in a volume-oriented club building shop. Club building will be presented in future videos. I welcome your comments and discussion of this video. Likes show YouTube that you value these productions. Subscriptions to the Devoted Golfer channel also show YouTube and me that you appreciate the productions and incentivize me to continue producing lessons like this. So earlier I showed you a simple saw. Now I'm going to show you a production saw. Now there are some features on this that you're not going to find on some of the simpler tools. This is actually my second of these. I used this so much I actually wore the first one out and I had to replace it. So let me show you first how it works. I'm going to come around in front, and it's a saw. I'm going to put on my safety glasses and my mask. So let me show you how easy this is to use. Now I've got my safety glasses on, I've got my mask on. Now at some point I took a ruler, laid it alongside this blade, and drew this line right here that you see. So when I'm getting ready to cut a shaft, I'm going to put a Sharpie mark on that shaft, and I'm going to put it in this clamp. Now notice that this clamp has 4 slots in it. You can cut up to 4 shafts at a time. And if you look right here, you can see how I'm taking that Sharpie mark and aligning it with this line. I'm going to be dead on that saw. Turn this down a little bit to clamp it. Turn it on and cut. Now, a couple things I want you to pay attention to. First thing, I stood to the side of the saw blade. My dad was a shop teacher. This is what I've been taught since probably when I learned to walk. If you're using a power tool, especially a saw, stand to the side. In case anything blows back, it's not going to blow back on you. Okay, so you saw how simple this was to use. This would now go to the sander and get cleaned up. Let me show you some of the other features of this. I'm going to get around behind it. This saw has a self-contained vacuum, and it has a bin for picking up the shaft tips. You didn't see that shaft tip go anyplace, did you? Let me show you the bin. I'm going to take a screwdriver and I'm going to take this screw out. And I'm going to pop this open. And there is my scrap bin. So all of the tips that have been cut ended up in here. Now, the other thing that this has is a built-in vacuum. So I'm taking off these nuts. And you don't have to do this very often. Usually you just reach in here and pull that out. So you can see how I have removed it now. And if we look here, you can see that this has a filter that's sitting over a vacuum pump. So this is a little bit dirty. needs to be blown and cleaned out or replaced. Put that on, and you can see the dust all over my hands at this point. So if I tip this up so you can see it, you'll see how there is, this is kind of a mess. Okay, so you see how there's a secondary filter right here on the screen, and what I do is I put a face mask over the filter that this comes with. So there is the filter it comes with. There is the face mask that an old face mask that I cut off and put over that filter. It captures a great deal of the dust. And I just find the hole and tighten this back down. There it goes, it's threaded back down. Set this back on here. Locate these two holes. Tighten up my scrap bin. Now, normally I wouldn't take this scrap bin off. I would simply open this, and I'm typically wearing a disposable glove at that point, and I'm pulling all of the stuff out of here and disposing it. Push it back down, put the hold down screw in, and I'm ready to cut more shafts. So we don't want to let this bin overfill while we're doing this, and it's a pretty simple process to empty it. Because it has a built-in vacuum, I don't have to worry about dust getting all over the shop. If you are cutting without a system like this, you're going to have to deal with dust collection. So there it is, my favorite saw. So if you're doing any kind of repairs or reshafting, you're going to need some way of getting the head and the shaft separated from each other. I've been through a bunch of extractors, and this is my favorite, and it's the latest one made by Golf Mechanics. He calls it his reversed thrust extractor. So before we start discussing the extractor, let's talk about heat, because you're going to have to apply heat to the tip of this shaft to get it off the ferrule, or get it off the shaft rather. You're going to apply heat here, and the epoxy is going to break down, and this is going to get covered extensively in a later video. So this device has 3 slots in it that you can see right here for different size heads. I'm going to find the smallest one that's going to fit, and it's right there. And now I'm going to clamp down here, and this tool comes with a ratchet. Now for me, a ratchet's a bit cumbersome, so I take an electric drill fitted with a universal tip that has a socket on it. I put the socket on here like that, and now with one hand I can go in or I can go out with my electric drill while I'm paying attention to other things that I'm doing. So the way this works is that, and I'm going to show this extensively later, when you pull in this direction, you tension a spring that's right here. Once that spring is under tension, then you heat. So these are our heating tools. This is a paint removal gun that you can pick up at your local big box hardware store. This is propane, and this is butane. So we will discuss the different kinds of heats and why you might use one versus the other in a later video. But this is your basic, best extraction tool in the business. So I would tension this up, and there's a ferrule on here, so again, this ferrule will have to be broken later. Load up the spring, apply the heat, and the beauty of this tool, as opposed to some of the others, is that the head falls clear of the instrument. So I don't have this where I'm pulling the head and it's sitting over the instrument, so I have to make sure that I catch the head, which is very hot at that point, before it falls into here. In this case, the head is just going to fall onto the table. In an earlier video, you saw me using an all-in-one tool for sanding. Now, many years ago when I first got involved in this business, I had an old club builder give me some lessons in his shop. And what he showed me was that where he had multiple processes to do with the same kind of tool, he wasn't wasting time changing belts. In fact, he had multiple drills laying around, so he didn't have to change drill bits. So I haven't gone to that extreme, but I have invested in multiple sanders. And I use this one exclusively for ferrules, and I use this one exclusively for sanding tips. So let me come around and show you how to use these. Let's not forget, we're dealing with dust here, so let's get on our mask and our safety glasses. So this is my shaft tip sander. Now, I mentioned before I don't like changing belts. So here I have a medium grade belt and a coarse grade flap wheel. So as I move from needing to remove a lot of material or needing to remove a little material, or as I move from steel to carbon fiber, I'm going to be using both a medium grade and a coarse grade sanding belt or wheel on the same tool, so I don't have to change back and forth. So once again, I've got my mask on, I've got my glasses on. I'm going to walk around to the other side so you can see me using this tool. Okay, so I'm going to prepare the tip of this shaft, which was just cut. There's a little bit of a burr on it, and I need to remove the chrome so it can sand, so it will glue properly. So I'm going to start over here on the flap wheel. And now I'm going to finish up on the other wheel. And this shaft was butt cut, so there's also a little bit of distortion here on the butt. Clean that up. Clean the edges of it up. And I'm good. So while we're talking about sanders, let's talk about dust control. A woodworking friend of mine introduced me to this switch, which you can pick up on Amazon, and I will put the link below in the description. This is an old fireplace vacuum, and it has a very, very fine filter bag in it. You can use a shop vac, you can use any number of vacuums to do this. What this switch does is it turns on the vacuum when I turn on the tool. So you see right here that it says tool, and here it says vacuum. So I'm going to plug the vacuum in here, and I'm going to plug the sander in here, and I'm going to connect the vacuum hose to this hole in the back of the sander right there. Now I had to take and sand this off so it would fit, so you just have to find a fit into this hole because it's metric, and it will take a little bit of work to get a nice firm fit in there. And watch what's going to happen. You're not going to hear me talk because this vacuum's going to go off. As soon as I turn on this switch, the vacuum's going to start running. When I turn off the switch, the vacuum's going to run for a few more seconds before it shuts itself off. Here we go. And that is a very simple and effective way to keep sanding dust out of your shop. So earlier you saw me using my tip sander. This is my Ferrule sander. Now I never take this belt off until it wears out, and I want to point out something to you here. And this is especially important when you're dealing with carbon fiber shafts. If you look very closely right here, you'll see that I put felt liners in this V-groove and also a felt liner in this round hole. I have scratched very expensive carbon fiber shafts as they brush up against this plastic V-groove. So I'm never going to do that again. I put a little piece of felt liner in here so that I'm not scratching anything anymore. So let me show you how this works. This will be explained further in a later video, but I just want to show you why it's easier to have a long belt machine for polishing ferrules than it is when you saw me struggling polishing a ferrule with a short belt machine. So here we go. So there we go. Perfect. Without having to have a fine touch. That was pretty gross touch, but because this runs so much slower than the short belt machines, I was able to do this almost without thought. One of the tools or instruments that you're going to need in your club building shop is some way of balancing the club. So we have different head weights, we have different shaft weights, we have different grip weights, and we have two different methods for balancing clubs. Now, on this video, I'm just going to show you the tools. In a future video where we talk about actually building, we're going to get into the discussions of the merits of one versus the other. So this is the traditional tool. It's 1920s technology. I think the patent was written in 28 or 29 or something like that. And what we didn't have back then, and I said I wasn't going to talk to technology, but I can't avoid it. What we didn't have back then were the electronics that we have today. So here is a swing weight instrument. This thing is probably 15 or 20 years old. It's from way back when I was what you might call a hobby builder. And the way a swing weight tool works is you just move this weight around until you find the point where it goes neutral right there. And so that's swing weight. We will discuss the technology later. So the other tool that's available is what's called MOI. And in MOI, you are looking at the period of the club. So you're looking at the dynamic weight of the club as it arches back and forth like that. Well, the original MOI tools actually hung the club like this and oscillated. So what we have now, and this is actually the third generation of the tool built by Golf Mechanics, who has built all of the MOI tools to date, and I'm slipping this pin into the butt of the shaft, pushing it up there, tightening it, and okay, so now I've got the shaft free flowing in this direction. Let me get this out of the way a little bit, and I'm just going to take, the machine's already been turned on, I'm going to press that button, and I get a read. This is the MOI of the tool, and what you try to accomplish in a build out is to get the MOI, or the dynamic weight, of all the clubs to be the same. So these are the tools. Later on, when we move into use of tools and into production technique, we'll discuss these two technologies further. These are epoxy heaters, and this might be considered a luxury item for a hobby shop. This is really for a production shop. And what you will do here is get a good, effective cure of the epoxy in about an hour. Now, this has a couple of advantages. You can do club repairs in a pro shop while somebody's having lunch. You basically put the thing together, put it in a heater, turn it on, heat it for an hour. The epoxy is fully cured. Now, fully cured epoxy, and then go read the specifications on the epoxy. They talk about hitting a certain amount of strength in 30 minutes or in 60 minutes, but most of them will say that they're going to hit full strength in 24 hours, and that means overnight. If you're a hobby shop and you're doing your own stuff, yes, set your clubs in a room that's at least 70 degrees, let them cure overnight, and finish them in the next morning. If you're a production shop, you want to be using an epoxy heater, because while one set is heating, you can start working on the next set and getting it prepared in that hour that these are curing. So at the end of that time, you take these, set them aside, put the next set in, and then go on to finish the clubs that you have already cured. So the way this works is you open the clamp here, get the hosel in here, and then hit the switch here to start the curing process. And it beeps while it's going. It starts making a lot of noise when it's done. And in 1 hour, these are finished. So, huge advantage. Many of my friends with high volume shafts or high volume shops have 2 of these 7-stage units. This is a 3-stage unit. It's a little less expensive. It heats up a little bit quicker. And if you're doing repairs, then this is good. If you're doing sets, you probably need a 7 and a 3 so that you can do 10 clubs at a time. Many of my friends use a pair of 7s so they're assured that they can do a whole set inside an hour. Epoxy heaters, epoxy curing, whatever you want to call them, a luxury item, but if you're doing production work, these are essential. This is not the tool array that you've seen in some of the other videos where we're talking about big production equipment, but when you do get into the club building mode, you are going to need some of the things that we're seeing here. Now, this is a very, very old set of hosel gauges, and these were used to figure out whether you had a 370 or a 355 taper. Right? So here's a 370, won't fit. Here's a 355 taper, will fit. Now, you know, these are interesting to have. It's not something that you really need, because this gauge, which you've seen in some of the other earlier videos, has pretty much replaced the need to have this. So we just set that aside. Here's our 355, here's a 355 taper. Here's our 370, which doesn't fit, and you can see how this gauge not only measures shaft tips, what was that, 335, so here's a 335, and guess what, it fits in there, it goes in here, and it's sloppy. So we can measure shaft tips, or we can measure hosel IDs, and this is the gauge you need. You can forget about buying yourself a set of these. So while we're talking about forgetting about buying yourself things, these are loft and lie gauges. Now, in the shop, I have one of these big, they used to be called green machines, and I have one of these big loft and lie gauges. I never use it, because when I was in the Callaway tour van many, many years ago, I saw them using a large electronic version of what you see I have in my hand. Now, this is probably the 3rd generation of this. This is maybe the 2nd generation of this particular tool. And what you really want in your shop or in your hands when you go to the range is this 3rd generation. They call it a tour loft and lie gauge. And what's different about this gauge versus this gauge is this length right here. And if you're out measuring wedges, which you're often going to do, you can't get over this long hosel and ferrule with the shorter gauge. With the long gauge, it easily goes on over that long ferrule and hosel. You can see this right now, and what we do with this gauge is we just put this flat on the face, we line up the red line and the blue line to the score lines, and we go over here and we read the loft, and over here we read the lie, and if we want to read the offset, that's even over here. And so you can see where this fits here, and this would not have gotten over this hosel. Now there is another feature with this gauge, is that it comes with some pins. You put the pins in here, and now you can use this gauge to measure a driver, because you don't have a flat face on a driver like you do with an iron, so you need these pins to accommodate the curve in the driver face, so that this gauge also works for drivers. So this is the loft and lie gauge of choice, and it is the only loft and lie gauge you're going to need, other than the gauge that's built into your bending machine, which we're going to look at later. A couple other things. This is a bounce gauge, and the way this works is you lay the club here on it, and then you eyeball the gap between this, which moves, and you get it kind of to the center, okay? And we make sure that this is square and that we're centered like that. And then you can put this on here, measure this, know what the loft is on the club, subtract one from the other, and you have the bounce. Interesting tool to have. If somebody ever asks you the question, you probably need to have one laying around. I use it maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Let's talk about these for a moment. These are tools for measuring the accuracy of your loft and lie gauges. So if you've got a putter gauge, this fits into a putter gauge. If you've got the green machine style, this fits in there. These are 2 more versions of the same kind of thing, where we put the gauge on this and we check the accuracy of the gauge. So if you don't think that your gauge is perfectly, properly aligned, you can check it with that tool and then adjust the gauge here so that you get the loft and lie perfect. And these are your calibration tools. You're going to need a set of these. You know, mine are, in a sense, antiques. They've been around for a long time, but it's not a technology that changes. So typically when we're measuring shaft grip sizes, we're measuring 2 inches from the tip, and these all have this 2-inch thing right here. So I put that on there, put my finger here, and I simply slide this. Well, it's certainly not a standard. I simply slide this up till it gets the 2-inch mark, and this is a very, very large grip. It's basically a jumbo grip, so I can't even get up onto it all the way. This is a similar version of the same gauge. What this one has are holes in it, so if I want to know what size this is, I can go to the different holes. Won't fit there. Yeah, it kind of fits there. It's definitely not fitting there. 350, 370. Oh, this is a 370. It easily goes into a 370, but it goes into a 355. This is a 355 tip. So these are things that you need to have laying around in a drawer. As we do other club building videos, there's going to be a few more tools like this, but these are the basic essentials that you need in your shop. One of the most important steps in iron repairs or set building is checking and adjusting loft and lie. I use this loft and lie bending gauge made by Golf Mechanics. I've owned a lot of different loft and lie machines over the years. I like the digital readout on this machine. It's easy on my old eyes, and more important, it lets me read loft and lie without having to estimate where the dial pointer is in relation to a scale. I have come to think of loft and lie gauges as a combination head vise and two-axis gauge. When selecting a tool for your shop, make sure you evaluate both functions of the machine. You can spend between $350 and $2,000 on a good tool. Choose a tool that fits your budget. More importantly, choose a tool that is appropriate for your shop volume. I measure and adjust the loft and lie of every club I work on. I use the calibration gauge I showed earlier in the video to check my gauge from time to time. On occasion, I see a set of heads that is so far off, I wonder if my instrument has gone amok. It never has, so I am left knowing that the last person that worked on the clubs was using a defective gauge. I own a loft and lie gauge. When I did loft and lie bending on a lower cost vise, I had to verify the numbers with that gauge. Remember what I said earlier, loft and lie machines are a combination of a head vise and a gauge. The lower cost tools are good vices, but not great gauges. I had to work back and forth between vise and gauge until I upgraded. If you are anything other than a hobby builder, you need a quality combination vise gauge. This tool can bend hybrids and woods. I no longer bend anything other than irons and wedges. Very few of the hybrids and woods on the market these days can be bent, and should you try, you will learn as I did how easy it is to crush a crown and ruin a head. You'll be putting a lot of force on a club when you bend it to adjust loft and lie. It is important that you have a good stand, and if possible, bolt the stand to the ground. If you need to bolt the concrete, you will need to learn about star drills and anchor bolts. I use the bending stand you see here, fitted with a rotating base. Unlike what you see here, my stand is bolted to the ground. Because my loft and lie station is in the corner of a shop, this rotating base makes it easy for me to get into the proper position to work a club. The stand you see in this video, available from Golf Mechanics, has a plate on which you stand to keep the base firmly on the ground. It is an alternative to bolting the stand to the ground and is removed when you bolt to the ground. So let me show you how easy it is to use this combination digital gauge and bending machine. The first thing I'm going to do is turn it on, and when I turn it on, I'm going to get a message asking me to set the reference. So I push in this pin, I push this head all the way forward, and I press that button. I'm now calibrated at 90 degrees with 15 degrees of loft. Now, there is a calibration gauge already inserted in here. Let me slide the head up against the calibration gauge, and you see that my calibration is 5164. I've got 63.9 and 50.9. So I'm in pretty good shape here. Pull this out and set it aside. Now, what we're going to do is get this out of the way. I'm going to grab a club and insert it into the vise. And when I'm actually working with this, I'm making sure that the alignment of this block and the score lines are perfect. Tighten this down. Now, you just saw the gauge rotate. When I'm in the shop, this is locked down so it doesn't rotate. I bring the gauge into the machine, and I'm looking at a 60-degree angle, and a 24.7 loft. If I'm going to bend and I use two bending bars, one has an offset that you can see here and the other one doesn't. It's a matter of which direction I'm bending and what I can fit into there, which one I will use. I use very long bending bars so that I get a lot of leverage on the bending bar. So I'm going to grab the non-offset one for the demo, slide it over the hosel, bring it down, and now I can work this either in that direction or that direction. And you just saw why I have an offset gauge, because in some directions it's easier to use an offset gauge. So I do the same thing, slip it over the hosel. Now you see how the offset gauge gives me the leverage angle that I need to work this tool. So I pull down on it to adjust the loft. I pull down or up on it to adjust the lie. And it's that easy to use a digital gauge like this. This is the last chapter of this episode, showing you the essential tools used in a club building shop. Club building will be presented in future videos. I welcome your comments and discussion of this video. Likes show YouTube you value these productions. Subscription to the Devoted Golfer channel shows me you appreciate these productions and incentivize me to continue making tutorials like this. Thanks for spending your time with me. As golf club builders and fitters, we need to understand the golf shafts we work with. The most comprehensive source for this knowledge is Golf Shaft Reviews. For a small annual fee, you'll have access to shaft stiffness, torque, weight, and balance data, and, most important, the EI bend profiles, the same bend profiles that are used by golf shaft engineers when they design and manufacture golf shafts. The measurements from my lab let you compare any shaft to any other shaft using the same measurement protocol. Golf Shaft Reviews also offers professional subscriptions that provide more detailed shaft data. If you want to understand golf shafts from the detailed perspective of a golf shaft engineer, take a look at Golf Shaft Reviews.